Welcome to my 264th video on my work with OO gauge. This video will feature a 3-rail kit-built model of a Stanier 262 tank locomotive that I bought on eBay. The usual, a bit of background history, a look at the new model with some necessary servicing and repair, and some running video on my Hornby Dublo 3-rail tabletop. This model represents a class of locomotive that is arguably one of the least justifiably obscure. That is to say, it's my impression that there's little general awareness that this class of locomotive even existed, but in fact a very substantial number of them were produced and ran on the LMS from the 1930s on, and subsequently on British Railways until withdrawal between 1959 and 1962. The larger sisters of this class, the LMS 264 tanks, are quite well known, and all derivative variants, Fowler, Stanier, Fairburn and BR Standard, have been widely available as ready-to-run models in OO gauge. But for some reason the smaller 262 variant has been neglected. And of course an engine with a 262 wheel arrangement is known as a Prairie. But I think even most railway enthusiasts would wonder what I was talking about if I mentioned LMS Prairies. For some reason the term Prairie seems to be almost exclusively used for Great Western engines with this wheel arrangement. The smaller 262 variant was introduced by Sir Henry Fowler, as with the 264 version. Here's a picture of a Fowler 262T. 70 of these were produced between 1930 and 1932, and all continued into BR service after nationalisation in 1948, being eventually withdrawn between 1959 and 1962. After William Stanier became Chief Mechanical Engineer of the LMS, he introduced his own variant of the type. As with many other classes, the most obvious change introduced by Stanier was the fitting of a tapered boiler in place of the previous parallel boiler. This is a photograph of the first engine of Stanier's 262T class to be produced, apparently in photographic grey. Unless that's crimson, it's not easy to tell in a black and white picture. It does seem that these engines mostly served in black livery, as seen here, although actually I suppose even this could be crimson. 139 of Stanier's class were produced, making a total of 209 of the two classes in service. The Stanier class engines were also withdrawn between 1959 and 1962. Here's one of the Stanier 262 engines in LMS service, pulling a 4-coach passenger train in the Midlands. Both Fowler and Stanier classes were rated 3P by the LMS and mainly used for local passenger services. I do think it's a little surprising that engines so relatively common in their time have largely passed into obscurity. No member of either Fowler or Stanier class was preserved. The post-war Ivert 262 tank is, of course, better known, and that has been modelled ready to run in OO gauge. But it hasn't found a place on my layouts as I tried to model pre-war LMS operations from the latter days of my grandfather's career driving for the LMS. Here's my new model as I received it, although the box was filled out with tissue and packing peanuts when it arrived. Unlike my similarly acquired 3-rail kit-built Patriot, this one arrived without any damage from shipping. And here it is on the workbench for some initial checking out and cleaning. This is a kit-built model set up for 3-rail running. As a kit-built model of an LMS class not generally available in OO gauge, I would probably have bought it even if it had been 2-rail, but I was particularly pleased to be able to add an additional class entirely appropriate to my favoured prototype to my 3-rail collection. The centre rail pickups on this model were quite unusual, featuring what looked like standard Dublo pickup ends cut short and soldered to the ends of a piece of spring. You can see here the wire coming through a hole in the base and soldered to the nut, holding the spring in place. The centre driving wheels have no flanges, so removing the possibility of issues with the wheels on tight curves. The wheels were quite filthy when the model arrived. Here's a close-up of one of the pickups on the end of the spring. On a standard Dublo model, these pickups would be pivoted by pins at the back, which have been cut off here, and those pins would sit in the ends of a solid steel mounting. The standard Dublo pickups are pushed down by a small spring inside the housing, but are not attached to that spring. I started by cleaning the wheels, as I'm always struggling to keep my tracks clean, so I don't want to run models with dirty wheels. It was a bit fiddly cleaning these driving wheels, as there was too much dirt to get off with a Pico scraper and brush, so I needed to use a bronze brush in a rotary tool, moving the wheels just a bit at a time with my bench power supply so that I could get the dirt off all the way round. I also cleaned the wheels on the front and back pony trucks. I noticed that the uncoupling pins on the metal simplex couplings were bent up. This was true at both front and back. I believe this was done deliberately, probably to prevent short-circuiting with the centre rail, which can quite often be a problem. The whole chassis is intended to be live with power picked up from the outer rails, and the pony trucks are not isolated from the chassis, so if the decoupling pins touch the centre rail, that produces a direct short circuit. I got the model onto my 3-rail tabletop for an initial running trial. It actually declined to run on the tracks at first, despite appearing to operate fine on the bench. I took it back to the bench and gave the centre rail pickups a good cleaning, which did indeed get the model running on the tracks. But it couldn't get around the standard Dublo curves, which are the same as modern first radius, without derailing. This was because the front pony truck was prevented from turning sufficiently to stay on the curve of the track, since it was hitting the front steps. This is, of course, a common issue with model locomotives. Model curves are much tighter than anything found in the real world, so models often come without front steps or with them as something optionally fitted in order to allow enough movement of the front bogie or pony truck wheels. In this case, I simply bent the front steps outward, and like this I was able to get just enough movement in the pony truck to get it round the curves. Well, this kit-built 3-rail Stanier 262 tank is a very nice little model if we can just get it to run. The problem is keeping the front pony truck on the tracks. Actually, initially it simply couldn't get around curves at all because the front steps were stopping it turning far enough. I've bent the front steps out in the hope that we can get away with that, but it struggles especially on that point in the far corner where it's got to go around the point. If the pony truck's not firmly on the track there, it derails on that point. We'll see what we can do. See, the question is, yeah, he got round it, but well, of course the train should always slow down when going around points anyway. He doesn't mind that one particularly because he's going through it straight. But this, yeah, we got by a couple of times anyway, so there you go. And I mean, otherwise I think it's a very nice looking little model. I'm quite happy with it, although of course, being me and wanting to run pre-war LMS, and this could have been built in as early as 1935. They were built between about 35 and 38, the Stanier 262 tanks. So we'll have a go at remarking it as an LMS engine, I will. The model actually appeared to run quite well, so I wasn't terribly concerned about doing more servicing, but I thought it would be good to at least have a look at the motor and lubricate it, and in any case I wanted to remark the model for LMS operation, and that would be easier to do with the body separate from the chassis. The only apparent body retention screw I could find was this tiny one at the front. I undid that screw. With that screw removed, I was able to lift the front of the body away from the chassis, although it didn't seem to want to come off at first, but by gently pulling the body forward after lifting the front, I was able to remove it. And here are body and chassis separated. As you may see, the chassis was fitted with an XO4 type motor. I put some oil into the reservoirs by the front and back bearings of the motor, and put grease and oil on the worm and drive gear. I lightly oiled all of the motion pivot points and the axles. I put the tiny screw back into its hole in the chassis, as this seemed the best way to avoid losing it. Since I wanted to mark this as an LMS engine, I needed to remove or hide the British Railways markings. I tried some microset on a cotton bud first. This will soften and remove waterslide decals, so long as they haven't been covered with an overcoat. In this case, the microset seemed to have no effect, so I tried some methyl hydrate, which will often work for removing markings. Unfortunately, in this case, it seemed to be mostly removing the main black paint. Incidentally, the BR number 40151 on this model would identify it as a Stanier 262 tank built at Derby in 1937, and originally bearing the LMS number 151. I gave up on chemical removal, washed off the sides, and gently sanded a little. Then I painted over the sides with flat black paint. I did wonder if I shouldn't have tried to spray paint the sides for a better finish, but that would have involved some masking and may not have actually produced better results. I left the paint on the sides to dry thoroughly before attempting to add decals. The small numbers on the smokebox door are often tricky to deal with. Someone had done quite a good job of putting the BR number on this smokebox. There was a piece of lead in the front of the boiler inside, and it fell out when I tried to work on the smokebox door, as nothing was actually holding it in place. I softened a piece of tack and pushed it into the mouth of the boiler compartment with the weight to hold the weight in place. I painted over the BR running number on the smokebox door. Then I applied a decal. I chose 72 as my new running number. This would identify the loco as the second of the Stanier 262 class to be built in 1935. I actually had a picture of this particular loco, so I had reliable guidance as to how to apply the LMS markings. For this smokebox number, I actually used a piece of a waterslide decal made for wagon running numbers. I put a piece of masking tape along the side of the body as a guide for applying decals. I used HMRS press-fix decals for LMS crew straw markings, as these seemed to me to best match the photo I had of the real loco. I positioned the LMS lettering and the running number based on the picture I had of the real loco, using my masking tape to keep the letters and numbers in line. Here's that side with the decal backing and the tape removed. I used the same piece of tape on the other side. Again, lining up the decals as in the picture. And here's that side after backing and tape removal. My black paint on the side looks a little rough, but I don't think that will be really objectionable. I had some trouble getting the chassis fitted back into the body. I removed the rear pony truck so that I could better get at what was happening at the back. There was a slit in the back of the chassis just above the bottom, and this slit needed to be fitted over a sheet metal edge at the back of the body and then slid right back to enable the front of the chassis to fit into the body. Both front and rear pony trucks had pieces of spring fitted under them to push them down onto the tracks, but these springs were a bit problematic as nothing stopped them from rotating, so they could easily get out of place. Here's the rear truck refitted to the chassis. You can see the spring here under the truck, but nothing really firmly keeps it centered on the truck as it should ideally be. I got the model back onto my 3-rail tracks in its new markings. Since it basically seemed to run okay, I coupled it up with a pair of articulated coaches to run as a little passenger train. Alright, let me see if I can run this 3-rail 262 Stanier tank. I've just got it coupled up with a couple of articulated non-corridor coaches here. I actually have made this into a set of 3, but I've only coupled 2 of them up to this because, well, I'm not honestly too confident in him as a runner. Mainly because of the problems with the, vacuum pipe keeps getting out of straight. It's mainly the problems with the pony trucks tending to come derailed that causes problems, but we'll see. Yes, he really hesitates over the points. Well, for 3-rail contacts, what can I tell you? That point is the most dangerous because we're turning on it. But I think if you've got the pony truck rail that right as you go into it, you can get away with it. But that's about it. Well, because I'm going to stop him there for now. It's as good a place to photograph him as any, so there he is for what he's worth.